And then there's the private non-profit sector. That's a fourth. And then don't forget, there's enterprise-based training, people in tens of thousands who are learning those skills, as I said about India, on the job. Not just on the job in the formal sector, but our sixth category, millions learning on the job in the informal sector. So it's a very complicated system, much more complicated than simply general secondary education. So it's helpful, as the bank did in 2004 and as DFID did last year, to be aware of those multiple locations and to realize that we're looking not at a trade-off saying, shall we have vocational education in school, or, as if it's either or. It's a complex system, and ministries should, I think, follow, at least in this regard, the scheme that the bank and the AFDB and DFID have laid out. Now, let me give you an example from general secondary. What kind of vocational specializations are easiest to do in general secondary education? I would say the easiest ones are the ones that don't need very much equipment. Accounting, business studies, IT, entrepreneurship education, office procedures. I think that's what they call it now, as opposed to secretarial typing. So there's a whole series of things there that don't need much equipment, even design and technology. And those are much easier to do effectively in general secondary school than, shall we say, mechanical, industrial, agricultural skills. And then if we take another example, if we move to the specialized technical schools, of which there are literally thousands in China, they're doing the whole range of skills from chefs, Chinese cuisine, to building and construction technology. But one of the things that we can learn from China, I think, is they deliberately try and make these high performance and well recognized. So they have a system of calling them key vocational schools, some of the best ones. And if you go to a key vocational school in Shanghai on shall we say, Chinese cuisine, it's like being in a university campus or one of these big technical colleges that you get in Canada or in the UK. So it's possible by investing to make parents aware that these are serious orientations to skill. A third and last example, you ask about apprenticeship. Apprenticeship is not apprenticeship in the formal sector is minute in Ghana or in Senegal or in, Lubumbashi or wherever you think, including in Kenya. Apprenticeship in the informal sector, where, don't forget, 95% of the workforce in many African countries is working, 95%. There's a huge informal apprenticeship system. But what I think colleagues might want to discuss in Johannesburg is how does the state intervene in that in a careful way to encourage quality development and other ways of making for better standards, better protection, but recognizing there is a dynamic and vast system that is already underway. So I do think that there are really important lessons to be learned by thinking widely, holistically, and in an integrated way about skills development in Africa.
Thank you. I thought the point about apprenticeships was a particularly valid one. Moving on to a fourth and final theme on enterprise. 65% of the population in sub-Saharan Africa is less than 25 years old. What challenges and opportunities does this pose for Africa? What role can enterprise education and microfinancing play?
Well, that's I think this question comes out of the World Development Report of the World Bank 2 years ago. They did an absolutely fascinating report that I'm sure our colleagues in Johannesburg know about, where they point out that there's no less than 1.3 billion young people less than 20 years old in the world, and probably more than that. And there's both a challenge and possibly an opportunity in that enormous majority, if you like, Africa's young majority, you could call it. Unlike Europe and North America, we have a few people with a greyish hair. I think the possibility of increased investments in TVET is the first thing, because if you've got this enormous group of young people, we must remember that in most African countries, only 2 to 3% of the education budget is going on TVET. And so we have this enormous number of young people and tiny, tiny, tiny formal vocational systems, remembering what I said about the 6 different locations. So I think the first point is that if we want to seize the opportunity where Africa does have this advantage, so does India, of millions of young people, it's essential to increase the investment in TVET and in skills development. And I think that's also concerned with political stability. If we don't develop meaningful skills for meaningful work, or what the ILO calls decent work, we are in a really grave political danger. We have encouraged millions of people to go to school for our Millennium Development Goals, but let's have some Millennium Development employment after those achievements in UPE. You asked about entrepreneurship as well and enterprise. A lot of people talk about the importance of soft skills when they're talking about entrepreneurship education, like creativity, imagination, problem solving, working in teams. But those are important whether in English, whether in history, whether in maths, or whether in enterprise education. I think it's quite important also to look at the slightly more vocational skills, like how do you do a business plan? How do you find out what are the opportunities for self-employment in a country where 95% of the jobs are in self-employment? The formal school curriculum doesn't pay sufficient attention to that. And so getting people aware of what are mini enterprises, what are micro enterprises, what is the ILO's start your own business? Why don't we look at those materials and see how we can integrate them into the regular curriculum of secondary schools, or indeed of vocational training institutes? You also asked in closing about loans and microfinance. It's terribly popular, microfinance. There are more microfinance initiatives in Africa than you've had hot breakfasts, really masses of them. But they don't pay enough attention to the fact that no young person coming out of 7 years of primary education and a few years in secondary can walk into self-employment, even if you give a few thousand kwacha or Kenya shillings. The person needs to get an experience of being a worker, maybe go into the informal sector, maybe become an apprentice, maybe learn a little bit on the job. You've got to have some customers before you enter into self-employment. And no kid that I know, including, I guess, you and me, have walked out of our schools ready to become self-employed. Extremely unusual. So I do think we need to think carefully about the opportunities for microcredit and what kind of pathways are going to come from school through experience in the workplace and then into perhaps some supportive microfinance help.
Thank you, Kenneth. That was really interesting, and I think you've really identified some really key, some very important and critical issues, and I thank you for your time.
Well, I hope it's of some help to our colleagues in Johannesburg.
Thank you.